My story begins 10 years ago on my first day of school when I stood in a classroom and didn't understand a single word being spoken. The teacher smiled, the students talked, papers were passed, and yet I stood there, completely silent. I had things to say, but no language to say them with, which, by the way, is terrifying when you're 7, dramatic, and absolutely convinced you were the smartest person in the room. That was my first lesson about boundaries and my very real introduction to America. But before I ever set foot into that classroom that one day in 2014, I carried boundaries with me. Some of them actually that were set long before I was even born. You see, to begin, I am the eldest son in my family, my very Middle Eastern family, and I just happen to be the eldest on both sides. So you could just imagine what that entails. And for the sake of our conversation, I'll let that speak for itself. Secondly, I am Coptic, part of one of the oldest indigenous Christian communities in the world, rooted in Egypt for nearly 2,000 years. Our story is one of survival, of knowing how and when to build boundaries around our faith, identity, and dignity, even when injustice tries to erase them. So I think it's reasonable to say I never exactly inherited silence. However, in 2011 and 2013, my parents and I experienced the Arab Spring uprisings in our home country of Egypt. And the Arab Spring was really the series of revolutions and regime changes, political violence that spread like an insidious disease all across the Middle Eastern region in the early 2010s. We watched as hope filled the streets and as fear followed close behind. And in those years of political upheaval, Coptic communities were targeted, displaced, informally erased through intimidation, exclusion, and violence meant to make even the quietest voices in our dear country disappear. But disappear, we did not. You see, long before any of these years, my ancestors learned how to survive. Generations of generations, they learned how to stay rooted even when the ground beneath them shifted. They learned how to live, speak, and worship even when it wasn't safe to do so loudly. And those are the people that stand behind me today. Really behind all the Coptic people today. So when my parents decided to come to the United States, they carried centuries of resilience with them, and thus they built boundaries to protect what mattered most, me and my younger sister Marla, so that we could live with possibility instead of fear. We all came here with heavy accents. They came here with degrees that didn't transfer. But my parents also came here with a stubborn hope that this country, imperfect as it may seem, still held promise. And I grew up watching something that shaped me more than any TV show, book, class. I watched my parents love this country, even when that love wasn't always reciprocated. They taught me something truly radical: empathy. The type of empathy that says we will love this country because we are the ones helping build it. A lesson I feel we are forgetting as a nation with every day that goes by, especially in the political climate in which we live. But back to me, I was still stuck. I had crossed all these different boundaries with my parents, only to come to the United States, my place of refuge, and find myself behind new boundaries. Boundaries that this time my parents couldn't dismantle for me. We're talking about language, voice, belonging. I couldn't speak English. I couldn't explain my name, my faith, or my story, and so my response was to hide. I began isolating myself from everyone and poorly performing in school until I had become the very stereotype that some had expected of the young immigrant. I forced myself into a box composed of others' preconceived notions and judgments of what I could bring to this new society I had just entered. And for the first time, I realized something truly painful. It taught me that injustice didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it cowardly hid behind the guise of silence. I thought for a long time that real empowerment meant erasing my accent and softening my identity to become the most digestible version of Mathew Habib for others' expectations and views. I literally remember practicing words like water so many times I might have forgotten how to say it in my own native language. But either way, that type of breaking doesn't lead to freedom. It leads to disappearance. I recall watching others raise their hands and listening in on conversations I couldn't yet join. And amid that silence, I began to believe something truly dangerous. that my inability to speak English and my lack of belonging somehow meant I will have really nothing ever to contribute to the United States. And that was a boundary I needed to break. And so I did. Well, I should add, I did with the help of one of the most incredible mentors that God has blessed me with, Miss Dana Hodges, who was on the screen. She was my first English teacher in America, and she never gave up on me. And so I learned English word by word, sentence by sentence, until my boundary began to grow cracks. And when it did, my voice finally came through. And when that happened, I understood something deeply profound. This was the point in my life at the ripe age of 7 years old that my boundary had met my purpose. Because how can I, backed by the spirits of my ancestors and standing on generations of sacrifice, ever choose silence? I had a voice now. Silence was no longer neutral. And so as I grew, that sense of myself really blossomed with me. I began trying to recognize injustice nearly every place I went. Classrooms and systems and politics and who was right, who was wrong. Seeing the reflection of my younger self in the trials of others and carrying with me the radical empathy and sense of self that my parents instilled in me. And pretty soon, I kind of realized that my purpose was for advocacy, after all, and real advocacy, I should mention, true advocacy, because my boundaries really taught me that advocacy isn't about who's the loudest in any given room, which is unfortunate because I am pretty darn loud. But rather, real advocacy is about not allowing silence to dictate the truth. 10 years ago, I was the boy who couldn't speak a single word in English. Today, I am a published author. I took a little sigh right there because I think that sentence alone would have sent younger me into an identity crisis, a midlife crisis. I don't know. He's freaking out right now. Honestly, standing before you all, giving a speech of this length in English, talking about a book that I apparently wrote in English is presently very shocking, but it also isn't. After all, I developed my love for English after experiencing my life without it, promising to never take for granted such a blessing as in speaking, reading, or writing. Oh, and if you're still wondering, but wait, where's his accent? You guys, I was 7. It's been a very, very long time. But to answer your question, if you stick around long enough, you might catch me roll a few very aggressive Egyptian R's here and there, My book, Malik's Moon, is about a young boy named Malik who navigates migration, belonging, and resilience. It's a children's book, but it's also my form of advocacy. It's meant to be a place for those who often go unheard to see themselves as worthy of being understood. Sounds familiar? It should. It represents a boundary broken, the idea that language limits impact, as well as a boundary built, the preservation of culture, identity, and the truth. And I hope I've exemplified those exact themes in our very short conversation tonight. After all, I've shown you how boundaries move, how they're good and bad, past and present. You've seen how two crazy individuals, by every meaning of the word, my parents, crossed a physical barrier, a literal ocean, so that fear wouldn't define their children's lives. I've shown you how a young boy sat in a classroom, unable to speak, and never allowing language to be a life sentence. And then finally, you've seen an entire community persevere for centuries by building boundaries around faith in spite of religious persecution. And maybe what I'm getting to is this. We misunderstand boundaries. Boundaries are neither walls to destroy nor limits to obey. They are definitions. People, sometimes collectively, sometimes individually, pour meaning into them. But you and I, we decide how they will shape our lives. To be frank, some boundaries will need to be built, and some will need to be crossed, and honestly, some will have to be broken. But having the courage to discern which ones you will allow to hold of value in your life is how we make our voices stronger. I consider this my first milestone in a hopeful long life of using my voice, because God knows how hard I fought to find it. And I think you should too. And I want you to do this, actually. kind of take a moment and reflect on all the external forces that you might intentionally or unintentionally be giving weight to in your life. Be they limitations, be they expectations or traditions. And I want you to decide which ones you will allow a place for in your heart. And pretty soon, our world will be a little bit louder. Thank you so much. Thank you.